Genesis 12, 1-3 says this. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country and your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So a very well-known passage to many of us by now. But as we come to look this morning at the fifth in our series of Searching Faith, and let me just briefly explain what we're doing here. This is really looking at various reasons, objections, if you like, as to why people would say, "I can't become a Christian. There's something in the way. Even if I wanted to, I just can't become a Christian because..." And this is very different from those people who would say, "I don't want to become a Christian." These are the people who are saying that, I really want to make sense of it all, but I can't quite do it. And so we've been looking over the weeks at various reasons that people might give of saying, it just doesn't quite add up for me. And today we're looking at this one that I've called Indoctrination. I mean, it's to be honest, quite a broad title. But I want to look specifically at those people who, through circumstance and culture, the very fact that they were born in a particular place, into a particular family, who adhered to a particular way of life, means that they came into this world perhaps as a blank canvas, but were very quickly programmed. And then when you come into a situation like we have here in the UK, which traditionally has been Christian, it's quite hard then to accept, for many of them, Christianity. And so we're going to try and unpack this. Now, I have to say, this is a huge subject, and I'm not sure whether we're going to do justice to it or not today, but we'll do our very best. Let me quote to you as we start from the great 18th century writer, Dr. Samuel Johnson. "Why, sir, you find no man at all intellectual who is willing to leave London. No, sir, when a man is tired of London, he is tired of life, for there is in London all that life can afford." There are apparently today more than 270 different nationalities living in London. I counted them all. I'll take somebody else's word for it. More than 270 different nationalities, of which we have about 14 or 15 in the church here. So we've got a long way to go. But it's true to say that London is unique, certainly in the UK, in being so diverse. And I wouldn't say absolutely unique, because it's not a complete one-off. There are many places, many great cities around the world that would boast to have a lot of different nationalities. But it would certainly rival many of the great cities in the world in being such a diverse place. But when people come into Britain, and so we're thinking London now just because we're in London, so why not think London? But when people come into London, they see the diversity. They don't see Britain, as is so often stereotypified. I was trying to think to myself this earlier, what would it be? What would be the stereotypical idea of the British? I remember on my first trip to the States some years ago, I was getting asked all sorts of questions from those down in Mississippi about the British. They thought that we didn't have televisions. This was only 1996, incidentally. They thought we didn't have televisions. They thought that we still used horses and carts. They thought that the ladies wore crinoline dresses, because that's the only portrayal they had of Britain on their television screens. I was pleased to tell them we have moved on a little bit since those days. But you see, the stereotypical British person would be white, middle class, a little eccentric, perhaps a bit pompous, definitely prudish, having no sense of style, a strange sense of humour, and, of course, Protestant Christian. But the reality is that when you look at the people of Britain today, and certainly within London, but even going outside of London, that description would not be true of many. Britain is far different from that. In fact, many people have come into the church here, having arrived in the UK, having come to London specifically to learn the English language, and have said to me, I can't find any British people here. Where are they? London is full of foreigners. And of course, that's true. I mean, there are still a few of us left. I look around the room here today. There are one or two of us still who might be described as not stereotypical British, but certainly as the general image of the British goes. But it is also true that we are diverse. And that diversity provides us with great opportunity as well. Because, you see, we have, unlike most cities of the world, the opportunity to reach the whole world right where we are. I've already mentioned that we've got 14 or 15 nationalities who form up this church. And if we were to step outside of the church and into the local community around us, we would find a whole load more nationalities right on our doorstep. And many of those from the nationalities that may be not represented in the church might not be here for a very good reason. And that is that in their country, Christianity is very much a minority. So you wouldn't expect to see them in church. And yet, Abraham was told that he would become a blessing to all nations. That his family, who became the Jews, out of whom came Christianity, would be a blessing to all the peoples of this world. Friends, it's right on our doorstep. Here's our opportunity. And yet when I speak to some of those who perhaps have come from other parts of the world, there are some stumbling blocks that get in the way. I was trying to think about what is it that keeps me, not so much now perhaps, but in earlier times, what was it that kept me remaining faithful to the Christian doctrines? Why did I remain a Christian? Why didn't I become something completely different? And I think it's true of myself and probably of others here too, that I discovered that there were certain chains that were holding me fast. I came into this world like everybody else here as a blank canvas. I came in, if you can't identify with art, as a computer with no programs on it. I was just waiting for someone to start pushing things into me. And I found that there were 4 particular areas that influenced my life, the chains that were suddenly attached to me. The first one would be family. My family were very much Christian. Evangelical Christians at that. And certainly from, well, let's say particular quarters of the family, very much involved in making sure that I understood the Christian faith from an early age through the family. I think also the social circles that I mixed in was another chain that was attached to me. The social circles that we mixed in was predominantly the church. I mean, it was other things too, but the church was probably one of the first social circles that I ever knew. And so straight away I'm meeting with like-minded people, and that's starting to indoctrinate me as well. Which brings us on to the third point, which was just general teaching from home, from the church, through their children's ministry. I'm starting to get teaching about Jesus. I'm starting to hear all about him. And then I discovered that when I went to school, that they would also teach us about the Christian faith. I happened to go to the first two schools I went were attached to the Church of England. And so there was quite a lot of involvement from the local church in the school. But also I think that it's fair to say that the only religious teaching that was given in the schools was Christian. Today that would be very different, of course. There's a much broader range of religions taught, but when I was there, that was never the case. It's another chain. I didn't know anything different. And the fourth chain, I would say, was culture. Because very often, religion and culture get so intertwined together that it's difficult to separate them out. How do you take Christianity out of Britishness? As I said to you earlier, the stereotypical British person would be Christian, and probably Protestant Christian at that. It's very much linked in with our culture. Therefore, people come to Britain expecting to find a Christian country. It's all linked in together. And so these were the chains that were holding me, and then there were some secondary chains that held me, and we'll come on to those in just a moment, because I actually think that if you look at family, social circles, culture and teaching, that wherever you are born in the world, most people will find all or most of those chains are very quickly attached to them. And it becomes part of your identity. And so when you come to the challenge of changing your identity through your allegiance to a different religion, there are some other chains that you very quickly find as you start to pull against the ones that hold you fast. You find that there is a cost to changing religion in many cases. For some people, the cost will be quite little. For some, it will be very great indeed. For some, the cost will mean disconnection from your family, disconnection from your social circles, disconnection from much of the culture that you've grown up with. It may mean risking having to leave your own land. It may mean risking imprisonment, and in the most severe of cases, even facing death. It's a big cost. When we pull against the chains that hold us, we very often find that there is participation. We were part of society, and by trying to change our belief, we're excluded from participation in society. People don't want us anymore. You're not like us anymore. You're ugly ducklings. I think another area is that of fear. Perhaps related, there's a lot of crossover in these, I admit. But fear. A lot of people, when they start to think about changing religion, they're fearful. What will it mean if I change? It's a huge step. We've already spoken about the cost. You can have fear of the cost of losing family, etc. The ostracization from society in general. Other fears that we've already spoken about that say maybe quite severe punishments for changing allegiance. And I think there's another thing too, and it's that of ignorance. There are many people who, if they tried to change their religion, would say, I don't know what I'm going into. I'm completely ignorant. I don't fully understand. If I want to change from another world religion into Christianity and I've never been taught about it, then what does that mean? It would be the same for me, because I'd never been taught about other religions. If I wanted to go and join another world religion, I wouldn't have a clue as to what I was going into. And I've tried very hard to understand some of the other religions of the people who live around us. And I do that through a little bit of reading, perhaps, but through talking mainly, through dialogue. I like to talk to them. I like to explore their faith and their festivals and what they're doing, and just to try and get a better understanding of these people and who they might be. And it opens the door, because I then get opportunities to share something of what I believe. And I remember one day I got the chance to go and speak to a group of about 50 Hindus a few years ago. And it was one of those situations where, if I'm honest, I wasn't keen to go. Firstly, I didn't know much about Hinduism for a start, and I thought, I'm going to be a fish out of water here. And I've been invited to this do, and secondly, of all the days to pick, it was Boxing Day, the 26th of December, and I'm thinking, I could be doing other things on Boxing Day. Why do I want to go and speak to a bunch of 50 Hindus who I've never met before? Why would I do that? But finally, I decided, okay, I'll take the opportunity, and I went in, and I had a really good time of just being able to share with them. Now, I know that Hinduism will embrace many different gods, and I think many of them went home saying, we'll add Jesus to our list of all the gods that we have. But at least it gave me a chance to share something of Christ with them. And they accepted it readily, all apart from the bit that he's unique, and that God is a jealous God, and he doesn't like other gods sitting on the shelf as well. But nevertheless, it was a good opportunity. And I talk to other of our neighbours of other religions and share with them something of my faith, my beliefs too. But what did Jesus have to say? Because the costs are indeed great. And we read today from Luke's Gospel, chapter 14. Now, Jesus wasn't specifically talking to people of other religions, asking them to change to faith in him, but in one sense. But in another sense, I think he was asking a very big thing of the people. The people are Jews. Jesus is also a Jew. So nothing radical there. Apart from Jesus is saying, everything is about to change. You are Jews who are living under the old covenant. And very briefly, that means the law of Moses. So they took the Old Testament writings as we have them today. That formed their scriptures. And Jesus is saying, the very things that Jeremiah spoke about as he looked ahead all those hundreds of years before and said, I see a time coming when there will be a new covenant, not written in stone, but a new covenant in the flesh, written on our hearts, executed by the Holy Spirit. He says, that's what I see. And Jesus is saying, here I am. I am the one who brings in the new covenant. I'm the one you've all been waiting for. I am, to the Jews, Messiah. Or as we might know the name better today, Christ, the Greek word. He says, I'm the chosen one. I'm the one you've been waiting for a long time. And I've come to bring freedom to my people. And he says, but you've got to change. Now, how hard can it be for a Jew who's been looking forward to the Messiah to accept the Messiah when he comes? It seemed it was quite hard. How much harder must it be for someone who has never heard about Jesus, never heard that there is a Saviour who is coming, never heard that there is a Christ or a Messiah to be watching out for, always being taught something completely different, not even related perhaps to the Jewish religion? How hard must it be to turn to Christ? I suggest it's very great. But look, Jesus says this, verse 25, Luke chapter 14, verse 25. Well, let's go to verse 26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoa, Jesus! You can't surely be asking us to do that, can you? To hate these people? I mean, if Jesus really meant that, if Jesus really meant for you to, hate is a strong word. To hate your family, would you want to turn to Jesus? I think we better do something very quickly in putting this into context and trying to get to the bottom of understanding what Jesus says before we go away with a misunderstanding. Jesus did not expect you to hate your parents, your family, your children. Jesus expected you to love them. Jesus expected you not to hate yourself, but to love yourself. So why did he say this? Because he's using a way of making the people sit up and think. He's trying to make the people prick up their ears. I've got something important to say to you, is what Jesus is saying. We still use little devices like this. Today we use extremes in order to make the point. We call it hyperbole, or at least we know what the cross means. For the people in Jesus' day, they also would have understood the cross, but perhaps not realized that Jesus himself would carry his own cross. But they were very familiar with Roman crucifixion. The Romans frequently crucified people. The Romans, when they crucified them, made sure that they made a public spectacle of them. Lisa and I sometimes go to a local beauty spot, and we go walking and we go up onto the hill, and on the top of the hill there is a stone cross. And the cross was put there 100, 150 years ago, something like that, by a local wealthy man who wanted to try and take away from the area the darkness that people assumed was there. If I tell you the hill is called Gibbet Hill, some of you will understand what that darkness might have been. Thankfully, you better not tell her, and Lisa probably won't even listen to the recording. She doesn't know what a gibbet is, and I'm not telling her. But on top of this hill, right next to the old A3, they used to hang people, and they would leave their bodies rotting in cages on the gibbet. A warning for all to see that anyone who passed by on this main road from London to Portsmouth would see the bodies of the criminals rotting away. The smell must have been repulsive. No one could have escaped it. It stood on top of the highest point around. You could not avoid it. The idea was to make sure that everybody knew what happened to criminals. The Romans employed similar tactics. They would take the person, put the crossbar of the cross upon their shoulders, make them walk through the streets. We know this from Jesus' own crucifixion. And finally hang them up to die, which may have taken many days. And people would be encouraged to pass by, to look at them, to take heed from the warning. Jesus says, unless you are prepared to die for me, not just die, but unless you are prepared to be executed for me. Who does execution? It's the Romans. Why do they execute people? Because they're lawbreakers. Whose law have they broken? The Jewish law? No, not the Jewish law. The Romans very often weren't bothered about the Jewish law. In Jesus' case, they said of the quarrels that the Jews had against Jesus, oh, this is your own silly little quarrel. We're not interested in that. Has this Jesus fella broken any Roman laws? Has he said anything against Caesar? Has he led a rebellion against Rome, against Caesar? See, and the Jews would realize straight away anyone carrying the cross had offended their captors. And he says, unless you are prepared to go against the authorities, against the establishment, against those things that are holding us down, and lose your life for it, you cannot be my disciples. It sounded almost like Jesus perhaps was leading a rebellion. But I don't think Jesus was about to lead a rebellion. In fact, Jesus told Peter off, didn't he? Do you remember when Peter came to Jesus' rescue as he was being arrested, and he grabs his sword out and he chops off the ear of the high priest's servant. And Jesus says, do you think I've come to lead a rebellion here? Not at all. When the people wanted to force Jesus into becoming their leader in a rebellion, what did Jesus do? It says that Jesus walked right through the crowd and out of sight before they could force him to be their leader. Jesus had as one of his team a zealot, one of those who was campaigning against the Romans, forming a guerrilla movement. Did Jesus say, hey, perhaps I could join your guerrilla movement too? He didn't do that. He didn't say, hey, perhaps you could just put me in touch with others who are like-minded. In fact, he took him away from that zealot movement, that guerrilla movement, and showed him another way instead. Jesus was not interested in the slightest bit in leading a campaign against the authorities. But Jesus is saying, if you want to be my disciple, then you've got to love me, you've got to be devoted to me, you've got to put me before everything else, and you've got to be willing to give up your life. And to help express that, he gave them two examples. And the first one is of a man who builds a tower, or frankly could be anything else. And when we start a large project, one of the first things we need to do is to sit down and say, how much would it cost? How much will I have to pay for my project? And we don't start the project until we know that we've got the finance in place, until we're sure that we can complete it. Otherwise, as he quite rightly says, people will ridicule us. And that's probably true of many of us. We've done things in our lives where we've had to wait. We might have had to save up a bit of money before we bought something. And it's no good trying to buy it until you've got the money. I know with today and credit and all that, there are other ways, of course. But generally speaking, you see the principle here. And Jesus says, unless you think about how much it's going to cost you to be a disciple of Christ, don't bother following me. Think through everything first. Jesus made some very high demands of his followers. Think carefully before you decide to enter into a promise with me. And the second example is that of a king. Now, Jesus is not giving military advice here, but what he's doing is just using a very simple example. And he says you've got a king with an army that is half the size of his opponent. What's he going to do? He's going to sit down, he's going to think, can I possibly come off well from this battle? My opponent is marching towards me, and if not, I better try and broker a peace deal before the enemy arrives. And so he goes out, and it's going to cost him a lot. And what would happen in those days is you go out to the opposing king and you'd say, rather than coming and entering into battle, taking lives needlessly, burning our city to the ground and looting us, how about we'll pay you off? We'll give you some money. Now, of course, that's exactly what would happen in biblical times. And there are many examples of where Israel was paying off their neighbours so they didn't go into battle with them. Before the exile, back in towards the end of the Old Testament, you'll find there that the kings at the time were entering into agreements with Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, to say, don't come and crush us. And then there was one smart aleck of a king, Jehoiakim, who decided that he was no longer going to pay his dues to Babylon. And Babylon marched down upon them. They took captive the king. They destroyed the city. They killed people needlessly. They took all the treasures for themselves and left the place desolate for 70 years. The Jews knew the history. They knew the cost. It was a raw nerve for them. And Jesus says, when you come to follow me, think about it. Think about what it's going to cost you. Think carefully. Now, this could actually apply to anyone, anywhere in the world, of any background, of any religion, of any nationality, of any language, who is thinking about turning to Christ. We're looking specifically in relation to people that perhaps have come from another religion or have had chains put on them. And what we actually have to do is not break the chains that hold them, but replace the chains. And chains makes it sound, doesn't it, like we're kind of holding someone prisoner. It's not so much prisoner. Think of the chains as like an anchor on a boat. If you haven't got the anchor, if the chain is broken, the boat is in danger. You're drifting. I was on a boat a few months ago, and we didn't use a chain at the time, but we were actually using the motor of the boat to hold it steady. Okay, so I've got my friend who is trying to catch a fish, and there is a current flowing. And he said, what we have to do, he said, is just keep the engine ticking over and just keep the rudder in a particular position. He said, keep it facing this way. Otherwise, he said, if the boat turns, he said, it's going to start throwing the boat around. It's going to get very choppy. And we're going to drift away. we're going to get into dangerous currents. So we have to do this. And that's in a similar way of just holding the boat fast with the chains. We drop the anchor which keeps the boat in place. And it's the same with our lives. The anchors that are put on us are not there to hold us prisoner, but they're to stop us from drifting. They're like anchors that we have. And with the best of intentions, the people who bring us up, who love us and bring us into this world, put anchors upon us to help us to stop drifting. And Jesus says, the real anchor that you need is me. And so we need to help people to drop some of the anchors that are holding them and replace them with ones that are going to hold them better. So it's important to get to know people. Jesus got to know his disciples well. I love that bit in Matthew 16. Jesus gets his disciples together. He's starting to get to know them. They're starting to get to know him. He's got a relationship with them. He was a stranger, remember, who came along, and he said to them as they sat on the side of the lake, mending their nets, he says, "Come and follow me." And these guys got up and followed a virtual stranger and became followers of Jesus. It was Jesus who went along to a tax collector sitting at his booth, collecting his taxes. And he says to him, "Shut down for the day, come and follow me." And Matthew got up and he went with Jesus. He didn't know who Jesus was. But now after a little while of Jesus sitting with them, building their trust, showing them who he was, demonstrating who he was to them, they have trust in him. And that trust is important because in Matthew 16, Jesus says to them, "Who do people say I am?" "Some say John the Baptist," they replied. "Some say one of the prophets come back to life. Some say you're a good teacher." And then Jesus turned it directly and very personally to them and he said, "What about you? Who do you say I am?" And we have that wonderful confession of Peter. "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Peter knew who Jesus was. And I think that Peter was so convinced of that because he had walked with Jesus, because he had shared his life with Jesus, because he had got so close to Jesus. And we need to make sure that the people around us need to know us, because when they know us, hopefully they'll know Jesus too. Social circles. We need to help people. When we do an Alpha course, and they do various training sessions for small groups and things like that, there's a very interesting little statistic that Nicky Gumbel brings out. And he says it's all very well having people coming into a small group after an Alpha course, but then they've got to make that transition from their small group into the church. And if they want to do that, that can be a hard thing. And apparently, that people, if they have 7 good relationships with people in the church already, they're almost certain to feel at home and to want to stay. If they've got 5 good relationships, there's a good chance they'll want to stay, although it's a little more tricky. And if they've got 3, a little less, and 2 and 1. And so as the number of good relationships they have with people in the church goes down, so the chance of staying. The more relationships you have, the more attachments you have, the more likely someone is to say, "Yeah, I want to stay," and find out more, become part of this. And it's important for us to befriend those around us who might be different to us. Not to give them a wide berth, but to get to know them. Not to be judgmental, but to show interest in them. Not to be shy about sharing our own beliefs as well, without necessarily bashing them over the head with the Bible, but to be open about things. Many of the people that come into this country, not all by any means, but many, have come into a place looking for a better life. They don't have anything. They don't have a family. We can become their family. We can befriend them so much that it's just like we are their family. We can help them with culture. Now, I need to just say something about culture here. Culture and Christianity are not the same thing. British culture and Christianity often get locked together, but they're not the same thing. And it is possible for someone to enter into a Christian situation, come to know Christ, without having to leave their own social culture behind. You don't have to embrace everything that's British in order to become a Christian. Let me trivialize it a little bit, but to make the point, if you become a Christian, you don't have to eat roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. Okay? It's synonymous with Britain, or fish and chips. It's synonymous with Britain, but it's part of our culture that does not lock us into Christianity. Okay? And so it's possible if somebody wants to come and have that part of it without Christianity, they can. And equally, if they don't want it, they can still have Christ without having fish and chips. And since I don't like fish, I'm very relieved at that. But you see, the thing is that people can still have parts of their own culture. But there is a danger that very often, and I've seen this so many times, people come and they want they want their Christian culture, or Christ. They want to keep their own culture, but their own culture is so tied up with the religion of their country that they end up slipping back into their old religious ways as well. And let me just say that God is a jealous God. And that's where cost comes in. That's where giving up something may mean it's very hard for us. But Jesus says we give up everything for him. I think we can help people to understand. We teach them. We explain things to them. We tell them what we do. We help them to get to know Christ better. We need to do all these things. And in this way, I think we'll start to build bridges with the people around us. And I'm not saying for one moment that suddenly you're going to find all the people of all the world turning to Christ. That's quite hard. But this is the start that we make. And in that way, people begin to accept that perhaps there is an alternative to what they've been pre-programmed for.